hmm My name is Trayvell Anderson. I use they, the pronouns. I'm the executive director of the Trans Journalists Association. Again, on behalf of Catherine and the IIJ, we're so glad to have you all. And now I'm going to introduce our moderator for this morning's conversation, Adam Rhodes, one of my favorite Latina journalists, also former board member of the TJA. Adam, take it away.
Hi everyone, thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here. So my name is Adam Rhodes. My day job, I'm a training director at Investigative Reporters and Editors, and I am also an editor of our now online journal. Like Travell said, I am formerly a board member of TJA, and I am a freelance investigative journalist myself, covering LGBTQ people in the criminal legal system. And so excited to be here. I think it's such an important conversation. It's a topic that I have grappled with throughout my career. So I will throw it to our panelists, starting with you, Drew.
Hey y'all, my name is Drew Costley. My pronouns are she, her, hers, or they, them, theirs. I am an assistant managing editor at Verite News. We're a nonprofit newsroom in New Orleans that covers marginalized communities. And yeah, I run our newsroom fellowship program for early career journalists, which is just part of our mission to cover undercover communities and issues, and also to help train the next generation of journalists from marginalized communities. And when I'm not editing or administering this fellowship program, I also report in the LGBTQ plus community and have a background that includes science, health, environmental reporting, and sports reporting. And yeah, happy to be here with y'all. Thanks for inviting me, IIJ and TJ.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Drew. How about we go to you, Annabelle?
Hey everyone, thank you all for being here in this space with us. My name is Annabel Rocha. I'm a reproductive justice reporter based in Chicago. I cover a little bit of everything, but for the past few years, it has been mostly focused on reproductive justice issues, abortion, period poverty, and everything else under that umbrella. I got my start reporting, doing local reporting here in Chicago, focused on specifically the Latinx and Hispanic communities here in Illinois. And now I'm freelancing and looking for new opportunities.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And throwing it to you now, Denny.
Hello, my name is Denny. I like to say Denny like the diner, Hershey like the chocolate. I am a former Tumblr blogger gone viral, shout out, turned uh, writer to pay the bills. And like Annabelle, I had sort of started my foot in the industry writing a host of things, but it definitely has narrowed down into politics, and specifically in this time, a lot of anti-trans legislation and covering a lot of right-wing rhetoric. Yeah, happy to be here. I'm gonna pass it to Ruxandra.
Thanks, Danny. And thanks everyone for being here, for having me. So my name is Ruxandra Guidi. I go by Rux. Feel free to call me Rux. I have been doing journalism, writing for about, 20 years. Did a lot of coverage on immigration along the border, social justice issues, international reporting. I still do some of that, though mostly it's editing and mentoring and supporting others in doing similar work. I have one foot in fiction, another in nonfiction, radio, magazines. I'm kind of all over the place, but I like it that way. And most recently, I am working on impact and engagement practices for Altavoz Lab, which is a fellowship for journalists of color in local communities across the country. So thanks for having me.
Amazing.
Oh, and sorry, should I pass it on to the next person?
No, that's it. It's just us now.
Travell?
Travella did introduce himself, I think, right? I don't know if I'm hosting. Listen, Travell can absolutely introduce themselves again.
No,
Oh,
I'm
you
good.
did
Go for
already.
it. It's you all show.
All right,
You're right. You're right.
all right, so thank you all so much. I'm honestly just so honored to be in this conversation with all of y'all. I've read a lot of all of y'all's work. I'm such a big fan of each of and every one of you. But I think, it would be really, really helpful, I think, as we discuss like the ways that we intersect our identity or don't intersect our identity with our work. I'd love to kind of talk about like how we started out doing this. I myself started out covering legal issues at a legal newswire in New York City, and that's where I built like that comfort covering legal issues and decided to focus that on LGBTQ plus people. But actually, starting with you, Rux, this time, I would love to hear about how you came to your career, what you cover, and you've navigated kind of the covering or contributing rather to mainstream outlets or not, contributing to them based on how they cover the issues that matter to you as a journalist.
So I'll try to be brief because, like I said, I've been around the block. But let's see. My dream was to be doing international reporting, and it was hard to start in 2000 and around 2005 because we have even more sexist, racist type newsrooms back then, and we did not have a flourishing kind of small nonprofit media outlet. It was like mainstream media was the only game in town. So it took me a while, but I started reporting internationally eventually. Um, and then pivoted from international journalism, pivoted more towards covering the border, which I've always thought, is kind of seen in the US as like international reporting. It's like, ethnographic, distant, objective reporting. So yes, I'm an immigrant from Venezuela. At the time, no one knew where Venezuela was on the map. There was no like stories about Tren de Aragua or whatever. And so covering immigration as an immigrant proved tricky and an important challenge for me to figure out early on. Um, and I won't lie, it was difficult, but I didn't know quite how to put my finger on it. Like I would get um, editors who would say, well, clearly you have a bias because you're an immigrant yourself. Or I would get a lot of editors who just like assume that I would know all the ins and outs simply because I speak Spanish, right? Like, oh, surely you know what it's like to every immigrant crosses the border. So, there was no distinction between like folks traveling with a visa or without a visa, class issues, race issues, gender, how all this kind of like makes covering immigration just a complex, big ethical dilemma, I guess, right? And so yeah, I think navigating all that at the time was very difficult. We did not have debates about objectivity. It was just the law of the land, and it was something that we all need to kind of like um be card carrying members of the objectivity club. There was no real discussion about like how do you cover immigration thoughtfully as an immigrant and how this embedded bias in newsrooms in this like anti-immigrant rhetoric that we were all picking up on and covering, how does it affect you personally? How does it affect your coverage? I could go on and on and on, but I feel like someone else should chime in. That's it in a nutshell.
Yeah, I'm so interested in kind of what you said specifically about like, you editors saying like, oh, you're obviously biased, but then like relying on you for all of that expertise. Like, at what point does the expertise kind of tip in the wrong way? Like, I guess to them, I think is so interesting. Also, really quick, want to shout out that we have a poll that I would love attendees to fill out, basically just about your comfort level in reporting on stories that intersect with your identity. I think those results will be really, really illuminating for all of us. But yeah, just for our other panelists, just feel free to jump in if you have something to share.
Yeah, bias is pretty funny. I mean, like on the flip side of that, it's like, then how do we allow the Stephen Colberts, the Jimmy Fallons to interview Andrew Garfield, like people who share the same identities as them? Um, and I guess with like a less petty example, um, something that's really taken off is these I believe it's Variety or Hollywood Reporter, but it's these like actors on actors interviews. And obviously, what is really grounding the interview is that the commonality of two people who share the same um, perspective. And that series has proven to be really fruitful. So it's interesting. Sometimes I'm just thinking out loud, but sometimes I wonder if bias is even the concern in the first place.
Hmm. That's really fascinating. Um, Drew, Annabelle, is there anything you two kind of want to add about how you've kind of navigated this in your career?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Drew.
You go. Okay. Yeah, I've been in the industry around the same amount of time as Ruck, so I remember when it was just like this is just what we do. And you kind of had to get with it or get lost. And so during those times, I just got with it because I wanted to be in the industry. But it always did bother me, and then I went through sort of like this phase of I actually quit journalism for a few years. And yeah, I quit journalism for a few years, and I sort of renegotiated my relationship to the profession and how I wanted to show up. And even then, like it was still sort of this slow build to like now where I'm just like everyone has bias, objectivity is a lie, and the faster that we can all acknowledge that and like really be honest and clear-eyed about that and about what that means, the faster we can get to a more like equitable place in the decision making that we have in newsrooms. And I've just tried to grow in that and take opportunities to um, assert that. When I found myself as the person in the room, that means that I have to be the person in the room, and show some courage to speak up and practice defending like my ideas and stuff like that. So it's been sort of this long curve over like the 20 plus years I've been in the industry. And now I mean it's I have worked at places like mainstream places where I'm just like, you all don't seem like you have a black person on this story. And then you all don't seem like you have a trans person on this story. And now I work at a place that like where it's way more diverse than any place I've ever worked in the industry. And so it's like, I don't know, that's part of our mission is to bring ourselves into into our coverage and our framework for how we do things. So I feel much more emboldened than I ever have, and that's great for like the back half of my career to sort of start it off. Being able to incubate in a place like this. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much for all of that. Um, Annabelle, do you want to share a little bit?
Yeah, and I hope that you guys can hear me because I'm having sound issues. But I was just gonna say that I think my career started a little bit later than some of y'all's, and so I think that my experience was different in part because of times have changed a little bit, but also because I started writing for like smaller local more niche newsrooms, and so I didn't necessarily have the same experience, surprisingly didn't have the same experience of people trying to like push down my identity or not cater to it in our writing, because it was more so shown to me that that's an asset in reporting. My first editors were Latino men and Black women and queer people, so they were covering their own communities and doing so with care. And I was able to take seeing that, which again, coming from journalism school, that's not what we're taught, right? We're taught to really wipe ourselves down. Um, so yeah, it's just interesting how the perspective is different.
Amazing. So, I mean, that's amazing that like, starting your career off kind of like with that mindset, I'm sure has really impacted like how you show up to the work every day as well. Just like as, example or instances of like folks like not having the support has like changed how we show up, I'm sure like kind of that like career-long trajectory of support. You're just like, of course, like I'm gonna bring my identity to work. Like, what are you talking about? As opposed to like, in some ways, like folks who have like faced that pushback have had to like learn that value, and it's not something that has kind of been innate. So I think that's a really valuable perspective. So I would love to see the results of the poll if we can. Is that possible? Okay, great. So, um, a little more than half say I'm struggling to find the lines and unsure of what to disclose to my editor's clients. I think that's super fair, you know, especially as freelance journalists. Like, I think that's a calculus sometimes that we have to think of. You know, like, is this something that I should be disclosing to my editors? Is this, or is this like, am I comfortable doing so? I think is more of like the calculation. But I don't want to ignore the 47% of folks who feel very comfortable. I think, that is a lot different than, you know, when I started out in my career, and a lot of folks that I knew like didn't bring their identity to their work at all. You know, when I started reporting on queer issues, or when I was like kind of the token queer person in newsrooms. Um, so I think we've all kind of talked a little bit about this, or like danced around this. But I would love to talk about kind of the calculus that we do as freelancers or as journalists when we're thinking about places to pitch, because that's something that I've had to kind of navigate a lot in my career, that like, especially covering, you know, the criminal legal system, there are certainly some outlets that I don't think are going to be respectful for my or toward my incarcerated sources, or you know, they're going to kind of toe more the line that is more like propaganda than, you know, restorative justice coverage that I want to focus on. So starting with Denny, I would love to hear how you kind of what that litmus test is for you in terms of like who you contribute for.
It definitely helps to um, read up on what they cover. Uh, just also like for the sake of saving yourself time, if you know that they're not gonna, you know, like straight up want you. Um, but the calculus does help. You know, I remember an instance, one of the first few pieces I've gotten to publish was with um Allure, and you know, I had mentioned in my pitch to them, it was an essay. Uh, and I had mentioned that I'm not seeing a lot of um, trans coverage or coverage from trans writers. You know, this was like 2018. Um, you know, and sort of like presenting it as an opportunity, knowing that, you know, with what I've read, that it would be met with welcome, and you know, it was. But um, I just think that research is uh, a big part of it. You know, having to um trying to pick my words. Uh yeah, just like really, really picking your battles. And that knowing that at the end of the day, like legacy or not, like uh as long as you can stand 10 toes with what you write, um, I think outlets, at least for me, would probably like matter sort of like secondary, or maybe, you know, not necessarily first, but there definitely is a math to do.
Yeah, I think that is so important, that like what we should be thinking about as journalists is like not like, can I get to the best and highest and like most exclusive outlet? It is like, you know, at least I measure the quality of my work by like how my marginalized sources like feel about it, if it educates them, or if like they feel like it's something that they can take to their own lives, as opposed to like the rubber stamp of like legacy, frankly, an industry that is like oftentimes been very hostile to me and people like me. So Drew, do you have anything to add? I would love to hear from you about like what that calculus has looked like for you in your career, especially, you know, in the context of like coming back to journalism.
Yeah, there are a couple ideas introduced. What specifically?
One more time, sorry about that, you cut out a little bit.
Yeah, what specifically? Because there were a couple ideas introduced just now.
Um,
Navigate what specifically?
I just love to hear like when you came back to journalism, how you kind of thought, like, I guess reframe like the places you wanted to work or the kind of work that you wanted to do.
Yeah, that's thank you for that question. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it because something that Denny was saying that y'all were saying brought this up for me. 'Cause when I was young, like I wanted to work at ESPN. I came in as a sports reporter and like that was the biggest game in town and like that's what I wanted for my life, you know? And then I interned at ESPN and I didn't enjoy it. It was like, what now? And I had to be honest about that, you know, like I didn't enjoy it so much that I did not want to work there. And I was like, okay, what now? And then yeah, and that was right before I like quit journalism for a few years. And yeah, I just it became more about the work and its impact, like you were saying, Adam. You know, it's like, and I still even then like I understood that like strategically it would probably benefit me to be at a place with more resources potentially, or at a place with more of a name, right? But it wasn't so tied up in my identity to like work at one of those places eventually, you know? And so I could be very clear-eyed about going in to work for those places. And so, you know, like when I went to go work at the AP, I was like, oh, it's nice working here. It's great. Lots of resources, lots of wisdom and experience among the people who are working here. But like, um, and they were at the time supporting the type of reporting that I wanted to do. And then they stopped supporting that. And it became very clear financially, literally, that it wasn't a priority for them institutionally. So I was like, all right, well, I could they have such a broad network of newsrooms and things they cover that it's kind of like we can try to find something else for you, right? If you want to stay in the company, right? If you want to stay behind our brand and our name. And I was like, that's not worth it for me, you know. I want to do the work. And so I went and found another job somewhere else. And yeah, I just you know, that's work that I'm sure there's at least a few of, you know, maybe us on the panel or even us like in the audience who like need to do that work of you know of reconciling that you want to work at a place with a name because or you want to be on TV because you know or you want that money because right you know and what you're willing to trade off to do that. And you know, that's not my work to do anymore. That's you know, that's everybody's work that they have to do if that's the thing that. And I think it's something that people don't talk about as often. They wrap it in like this. I have this love for the profession that like somehow propels me to work at the Post or the Times or whatever. It's like, is it really that? You know, I don't know. It wasn't for me. You know, that I still have the love for it and I can do it at smaller places, you know, and as long as I can make my bills and, you know, do good work, I'm pleased with that.
Amazing. Thank you so much for all of that. Like truly like hell yeah. All right, so Annabelle and Rex, I would love to also hear from both of you about how you particularly navigate this because you know covering both like reproductive justice and immigration right now, like really top of like the ladder in terms of like the issues that are impacting people's day-to-day lives these days. Like obviously like race, LGBTQ issues are also really high up, but those have kind of been top issues for a while. And you know, I'm also based in Chicago, so friends of mine are literally out in the streets right now covering like the ICE enforcement and everything like that. So, yeah, I would just love to hear from both of your perspectives, especially with so much like disinformation and misinformation about these topics, like how you kind of cut through that and like figure out what outlets will treat it with respect or not.
I just want to touch on real quick something that Drew said because I think it's important. Like, I think we would be lying if I would be lying if I sat here and say that like money doesn't come into deciding who I'm pitching and who I'm writing for. And it's unfortunate, but it's just the world that we live in, right? Where we got to pay the bills and we got to pay the rent. Um, it's unfortunate that a lot of times, or like there's so many screenshots in my phone that I have of like, oh, I really want to pitch an idea to this outlet, or like I have a story idea and like this would be a good fit for it. And then you see the rates and you're like, okay, you know what I mean? I just wanted to make a note of that, that like, yeah, that's an important factor. Unfortunately, yeah, and pay transparency, as Catherine noted.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, like I think as much as we like to think of like journalism as like a very important social good, like which it is and everything, but it is still what pays our bills. And I think that like we can't separate like the conversation about money and journalism from like all of this conversation because I think as you've said in your experience, you sometimes like that money like reflects the priorities of an institution as well. So, Rex, is there anything you wanted to add about kind of like that mental calculus or?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I was just thinking about all this. I feel like because I was so keen on doing international reporting, particularly from Latin America, there was no way I was going to get a foreign correspondent job as a young 20-something woman from, Latin America. And so I was forced into freelancing pretty early on. Well, forced. No one put a gun to my head, but you get the idea. I mean, I wanted to do this. And so it was a really great training into negotiating rates, into identifying who the assholes are in the industry, into like just figuring out how to hustle, like all those things that I felt like early on in my career, I developed a love for like, I came up with this, I got the sources, I know how to do this. Let me get it done and let me also develop complementary skills so I could sell these stories to multiple outlets. So that when I started getting full-time jobs, or the few full-time jobs I had in between, they really paled in comparison. Like they just, I really was not the person that could sit in front in an office. Um, and so I've cycled in and out of newsrooms, but really my happy place has always been working independently. Um, and and yeah, I would say maybe 10 years ago, is when I really kind of figured out like I have relationships with people, not with institutions. Most media organizations, not all, but most will disappoint us in one way or another. Or will not really kind of invest in us as freelancers. Well, they won't at all, really. Typically, you have to drum up the funding, to do investigations, to like, get the grants so you can get the stories done. And so I don't know. I just like, I connect with editors, I connect with colleagues and collaborators. And through that, I kind of figure out, oh, is Mother Jones a good place? Not just in terms of how much they pay, but are they going to treat me fairly? Are they going to, are they going to respect what you were just saying, Adam? Are they going to respect the rights and needs and, reality of the folks I'm interviewing and communities I'm reporting on? And then yeah, I mean, I don't have an Excel spreadsheet, but I kind of have what I call my shit list. And it's like, these are the people I don't want to work with. And these are the people who like, because of word of mouth or because of my own experience, like, I think they get it. But, the unfortunate reality is that that list has been, well, the shit list has been growing. The kudos list has been shrinking. So yeah, it's a challenge.
Yeah, I also have a shit list. It's like my little mental Rolodex. I'm just like, I'm never talking to you again. Um, so I think we've all kind of talked about how we show up to our work now. And obviously that's kind of come with some hard fought lessons and some hurt feelings, I think, as we've all obviously shared, Denny, that outlet heartbreak is so real when like you that moment when you realize it's like, oh, this place that I've idolized for so long is actually a dumpster fire or like actually does not in any way support like the what I do or like very overtly like mistreated me like I think as we all have shared in various capacities. um is there like a lesson that you wish you learned earlier on in your career? I think mine is quite honestly that like that the measure of the quality of my work is not like if I'm in a fancy outlet, like if I'm in like the Post or the Times or something like that. It's like if I'm like serving my community as it needs to be served. Like I tell journalists all the time now that like you serve people, you don't serve institutions, you don't serve the government when we're pushing it back against like government like abuse or things like that. And I think the same goes for outlets. Like I don't work, I, obviously may work for one particular outlet, but like at my core, I'm serving the public. And so that's kind of the biggest lesson that I wish I learned a little sooner. And everyone feel free to just jump in.
Sure, yeah, them cash and prizes ain't gonna save you.
I remember I think I had just gotten like my very first journalism job, and then a round of layoffs like happened, I think at I forget what publication, but like a list of like 3 Pulitzer Prize winners was like on the list of people getting laid off, and I was like, but that's the big one. Like, what are we talking about? Like, if they're laying off people with a Pulitzer Prize, then everyone's on the chopping block kind of deal. So yeah,
Yeah, and the other one is that these companies don't love you. That's not your family. They might say it, they might make you try to feel like it, but it's not your family.
a pizza
They're
party does not count.
they're extracting value from you, and you need to just understand that every day you show up. But and especially before you start a new job.
I think it's really important to make some clear distinctions in your mind. If you love journalism, if you feel like you don't want to do or can't do anything else, which I'm sure everyone in this room and everyone in this Zoom has grappled with or will grapple with, right? I think it's important to recognize the distinction between the love of storytelling and public service journalism, and then the money you get for it, and know how to negotiate, know what your work is worth. And then to also be able to separate the job from journalism, like it's, I won't lie, whenever I go on LinkedIn, there's a part of me that just like cringes at like our culture of like, I got this thing, I got that thing, I got this award, I got that award. And trust me, I'm as guilty as anyone else of like using it for that purpose. But those are not the reasons why we get into journalism, why we stay in journalism. Like there is the whole kind of like journalism award and you know, staircase or whatever, ladder to management, high paying jobs, industrial complex. But that is not in my mind why I do journalism. And I try to be very clear with myself. Am I doing this for my ego, or am I doing this because it's like it nourishes this love I have for journalism and it sustains me, and it's a sense of purpose. And so, you know, I'm not saying, I'm not trying to be like puritanical here, but I think it's good to kind of like do that check-in regularly so that we don't burn out, so that we don't like become bitter, so that we don't like stay in it for the wrong reasons.
Yeah, that's so important. I think that like mental that like check in with yourself and be like, why am I doing this? Because I think, like you said, like the job can bog you down a lot. And so I think you have to like really have those like almost like recentering conversations is like, but like why am I like dealing with all this crap basically? So yeah, Denny, you had something to say. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, on the topic of freelancing, I think the silver lining, and like a gravely underrated part about being a freelancer is that you're not beholden to the institution, you're not beholden to the editor. And so in my experience, it's always been like, if you have nothing to lose, like I'm gonna ask for, I'm oftentimes almost always gonna ask for more money. And if I disagree with an edit, I feel very, very comfortable pushing back as opposed to being in a newsroom where maybe you have, you know, um, a particular relationship with an editor where, you know, if you were to, let's say, like stick up for yourself a little more, there might be consequences. And so, um, what I love about freelancing is that it actually is a great practice in self-advocacy.
Yeah, I love that so much that like, I think there's so much, I think, maybe misconception or honesty that like, yes, like freelancing can be precarious and things like that. But like you also, like you said, Denny, like have a lot more agency and saying like, I disagree with that because it, like you said, it's so much easier to be like, okay, I'm just gonna pitch these articles to somebody else as opposed to like I have to ignore you in the kitchen every day because we had a fight over an edit that got bad or like something like that. So yeah, I love that framing that like, uh it's self-advocacy and it's more autonomy.
Yeah,
So
and if it doesn't go well, like let's put a kill fee in the
yeah,
contract.
absolutely.
And always ask for a contract.
Yes,
Yes.
absolutely. Annabelle, anything to add before we jump into the Q&A?
Yeah, I think a little bit different than what we spoke on, but I think one of the things that I wish I learned sooner was that it's okay to show up as yourself. I think a lot of us suffer from imposter syndrome and feeling that we need to present ourselves a certain way that may not be as authentic to ourselves. Even just changing the way that we speak or like the way that we dress. I think I very much felt like I needed to present myself a certain way when I started reporting, especially when I was younger and like in college. And now it's like you really don't. I think your sources especially want to see your authentic self, and especially if you're reporting on your own community, they want that camaraderie, and it's easy
Yeah.
to sense when it's not coming off authentic. Even like little things like wearing my hoop earrings today. Like today, I had no problem doing it. 3 years ago, it would have been something that I would have probably just put on my little studs. Things like that.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. I remember my very first like journalism job, I was like an editor at my college paper. And like my editor kept telling me to like hide my nose ring because she was like, it's unprofessional. But I'm also just like, what are we doing? And then I remember I got like a journalism job like in New York City after that. And I like sheepishly asked like my editor and was like, is it okay if I like have this nose ring? And he's like, what are you talking about? Like, I don't care. Like, and it was like I did feel it was like, okay, now I just embarrassed myself to this manager asking if I can like wear a nose ring at work anyway. But yeah, I think like even the way you like physically show up, like I've had like queer and trans sources like where I, dress up a little bit for it and they respond a lot better. You can see like the comfort like or them like relaxing a little. They're like, oh, okay, like somebody I'm not gonna have to explain maybe the most basic aspects of being queer to somebody or like something like that. So I would love to turn it now to the audience Q&A. So feel free to open or to ask any questions in the Q&A. I'll start reading them now. Christina has a really good question here. Christina's been sitting on a story for a few years that she's reluctant to do reporting on because it intersects with about discriminatory experience, some of us including her share. Um, uh the conflict not so much being part of the community but sharing the same experience. Well, she thinks neutrality is a myth like Danny mentioned. It's grateful to hear us kind of talk about that. I think just as and just to jump in with my own thoughts here, just as like I think we see or we're talking about the value of bringing our identities to our work, that goes for the same of like the experiences that we have. I think reporting on anti-LGBTQ plus discrimination, like my experience like being discriminated against in the workplace, like brings value to that work because I think it also helps when people push back against like, oh, like that didn't really happen. It was like, well, I know this is the process that I was supposed to use and it failed me in this way. And so I think it can almost like lead you to new story ideas or like add expertise to the work that I think is really valuable. I think a very, very dear friend of mine, actually, like this is literally the thing she told me that helped me just completely like shift the way I thought about like showing up like as a queer person in journalism is she said she's like your identity or like your lived experience is expertise, it's not bias. And so I think that is something that I really, really take to my work.
If I may chime in, sorry,
Yeah,
I don't mean
yeah.
to talk too much. You know, I early on in my career, I had an editor tell me there's all kinds of journalism. The only journalism, I mean, news isn't the only journalism. there's essays, there's opinion, there's features, there's like first person stuff. All that falls under journalism, nonfiction storytelling. You may be working with the New York Times, let's say, yeah, they have their own kind of like rules and sense of ethics and know-how and whatnot, but that's not the only place that you could write for, nor is it the only way to do journalism or the best. And so, depending on Christina, depending on Christina's story, I would say like think more broadly about like maybe this is a story worth putting yourself into and really kind of owning that perspective and that opinion even, like I think it depends. I personally, I wear my principles on my sleeve. Opinions is something else, unless I'm writing an essay or an opinion piece or a column. But I very much take a stance on some things. I feel like my reporting should be just and should be driven by a sense of justice. I mean, that's something that I've arrived to. It wasn't always that way. And so that guides me and it makes it easier for me to figure out, like, I stand on the side of this, I can still be balanced. Let's see who I could work with. But I think it's sometimes, especially early on in our careers, it's hard to identify like other kinds of writing also is journalism, a writing that can be opinionated, writing that can be coming from the first person. And I would encourage us all to think of all that as part of the journalism ecosystem.
Yeah, I really love that the idea that like, all of what we do is journalism. It's not this narrow focus is like 1,000-word story that has like this type of lead and this type of quote, that I think we've sometimes been taught, especially in journalism school, to think of journalism in a one specific like newsy format. But, like you said, Rux, it is so vast and different. And I think that's really, really valuable. So we have one more, another question. Lee is an intern for the local NPR affiliate. And what advice would you give to emerging Black or POC trans journalists on finding support, building credibility, and protecting their well-being while covering sensitive topics? Lee has been doing some reporting on trans-related stories, and they want to grow as a journalist. I would say, actually, I would love it if you started, Drew.
Good. Be active about finding support. If you're not already, that's something that I didn't really do early in my career. I also didn't really know. I knew I was Black, but I didn't know I was trans. When I started as a journalist, I didn't even know I was queer yet. But even after I discovered that I was queer, I didn't really like actively seek community like I do now. And I feel like finding that support wherever inside and outside the industry is important. And I think it's important probably to try to have both because, sometimes I don't want to talk about journalism. And sometimes people can't not talk about the work. And sometimes I don't want to talk about the work. I want to talk about the most. And so I want, friends outside the industry who are like me, to talk about other things with, right? And then take advantage of mentorship. That's one thing that I did not do a very good job of that I've been trying to do a better job of the last like 5 to 7 years of my career. Even as somebody who was like more mid-career when I started trying to take advantage of that, I think it can always be important to just try to connect with people who have more experience with you, who came before you. And yeah, just don't let the thing consume you, the work, the work. The universe is so vast, you know, and you getting a story done is not necessarily always the most important thing, and it's not worth your mental health. Um, it's something that I started to learn in fits and starts early in my career, but really learned it during the pandemic when I was like, everything felt like it had so much purpose in the work that I was doing. Because I was like on this intersection of like being Black and queer and being a science and health reporter and an environment reporter. And so I was like nonstop working, and then I just burnt out, and I had pretty severe mental health consequences from that. And so I try to just keep front of mind that I need to be here to do the work, and in order for me to be here to do the work and other things, I need to take care of myself, and consistently. So that's what I would say. There's a lot more though.
Yeah, anyone else have anything? All right, truly, I feel like you said it all, Drew. So, I think we can leave it there. But another question from Christina, and I think this is a really important question that, as freelancers, we talk about like pay negotiation and asking for more money, but sometimes it's like it's either this or nothing. And so, what I even myself, I would appreciate like us talking about like how do you kind of psych yourself up, or like how do you like prepare for those conversations, so like you toe the line between like gently asking for more money and like not burning that bridge, or handling that kind of like firm, like we're not paying you more than this.
Okay, I hate the silence, so I'm gonna chime in again. Um, okay, so first of all, I think it helps to figure out, so your work is leisure time that you're giving up, right? What is it worth to you to work an hour of your day? Put an amount to it. $20 is not a good fee, right? Ideally. Starting out, I would have, yeah, I took $20 an hour or less, but figure out how long you've been in the industry, how much better your work is getting, talk to your peers, your colleagues, other freelancers, and figure out what they're getting paid per hour, and put a number to your hour of leisure time that you're giving up to the man, and then really stick to it. If you say that you don't want to get paid less than $50 an hour, that'll force you to identify those folks that are paying 50 or more and that value your work. I mean, you don't want to be working for someone that doesn't value you. Over time, this is going to make you feel shitty. You're going to do shitty work. It's not a good formula. So I try to be really rigid about that. I will admit that I'm horrible at like facing the manager, whoever that might be, and being like, I don't think I should get paid $50 anymore. I should get paid 60. Like, so I have built out this whole very ridiculous process so that I can face these people and do it. It includes really psyching myself up. It includes like putting up a picture of my spirit animal in front of me or looking at it and really being like, you need to channel this thing. You need to like, whatever it takes. But it's like really crucial that we become better advocates for ourselves and for others in some way. And then, joining a union, joining freelancers union, knowing that you have a community of folks that like are after this, they have the same needs. And it's not just about pay, it's about like treatment, right? And like advancement and like feeling respected. And so yeah, I mean, I think all of that is important to kind of be able to face the manager or whomever. But I remember one of my last full-time jobs finding out one day that our executive editor was getting paid $500,000, but he was never in the office. He was always out surfing. Really pissed me off, and became a motivating factor for organizing in the newsroom, for like facing my managers and the powers that be, and kind of like advocating better for myself, because there was something in learning about that amount and realizing what little pay I got, and the many extra hours that I put into my job, and how much they were fighting our unionizing efforts, that kind of like that consolidated for me on that day, that kind of made it clear, like, no, this is a priority for me.
The surfing is like so visceral. Like I think I would maybe have an aneurysm if I found that out. Does anyone else have anyone to add? We have some questions in the chat I'd love to jump to if not. All right, sweet. We have a question about handling language or framing from editors that we feel violates our principles. There is certainly again self advocacy and autonomy in media, but like there's also I think sometimes folks may feel less comfortable pushing back against that. Again, depending on kind of the calculus they've done or whatever. But yeah, any advice for kind of pushing back on things that you think kind of violate your principles with respect to like the actual writing and things like that? I admit, I have found more success in those conversations when I like pass the buck to someone else, kind of like making the criticism, if that makes sense. Let's say, I was talking to, or I was writing something and an editor maybe quoted like an anti-trans politician like making statements and like didn't kind of challenge like the actual statement itself. I might like turn to TJ's resources and say like, hey, like the Trans Journalist Association actually really recommends against this, or the NLGJA, like their industry guidance is that we actually don't treat it like this and this perpetuates this kind of harm. Because I think editors oftentimes will respond to like that kind of authority as opposed to maybe the more emotional appeals that we may be making in an abstract, like that violates like my principles and my values. Not to say that that isn't obviously like an important reason to push back, but like relying on those kind of non-emotional, more I guess like academic resources or like industry resources, because I think then that puts editors on notice, like, oh, like we might be seen negatively in the industry if we violate this norm or this principle or something like that. And I think that's where I found a lot of success in like kind of like not like threatening folks, just like the industry will like not like this, or just like, hey, this is what the experts say. If like you disagree with them, that's one thing. But so that's kind of how I found success.
Yeah. And if you can muster the courage to, well, one, regulate your nervous system, 'cause sometimes that goes off. But two, if you can muster up some courage to push back a little, my advice would be to have them explain themselves, like flip the coin and sort of just question their edits. And sometimes that can be helpful in the sense that maybe they don't really know what they're talking about. If they don't have something really um, valid to back it up, or if it's something that they actually don't really have that much care for to enforce, then you might have, the wiggle room to um, stand your ground.
Amazing. Kind of continuing the conversations about like rates and stuff like that. What do you do when you are in a low market and people are just like not willing or able to pay you what you're worth? I think, especially, I have almost exclusively worked for indie, queer, small media. And sometimes, again, as we've said, like that monetary calculation is part of it, but there are certainly sometimes where I'm just like, this is the perfect outlet for a story, or this is the perfect place that I want to like write for, whatever, but the money just isn't there. Like, what does that calculation look like? If that is your question, Sheldon. I admit, I think that's kind of more the tougher part of that calculus, because I think like when everything, like the values, the purpose, the meaning, everything align except for the money, I think that is the hardest one, at least for me, to walk away from. Um, but then, I think that comes with like a tough kind of calculus of like, do I need to expand my reach in terms of other outlets I'm serving? Is it possible that there's like another market I can tap? I don't know. I think that's really complicated, but I would love to hear y'all's expertise.
When the mark, I don't know. I graduated, I was supposed to graduate undergrad originally in 2008. I instead dropped out, but nonetheless, It was terrible market. And then when I graduated grad school, it was the spring of 2019. So the next year was the pandemic. I I don't really have like prolonged. I was not a freelancer. I was not doing journalism during the recession, and then I had institutional. I was like I had a full-time job or part-time job during pandemic times. So um I wasn't a freelancer then. But what I can imagine is that those would be times when it's beneficial to have like a network of people to like talk with and understand like what are the going, what are the regular rates that people are getting to like know exactly how depressed the market is. Because if it's truly depressed and you got to make bills, then you got to do what you got to do. There have been times since I started doing journalism in high school, and I've done food service, I delivered newspapers, I've done a bunch of different work to make bills, because um, that's reality, and I wasn't willing to like, for me, my line was I didn't want to like go too deeply into comms work or anything like that. Um, when I joined the industry, there was a brighter red line between doing comms and doing newsroom. Over the course of her career. And so yeah, I would have to find like jobs outside the industry to help me pay bills. And so, you know, those are all my thoughts on the situation. But I feel like it would probably be beneficial to know like exactly how depressed the market is and know if when somebody is telling you they don't have it, that they really don't have it, I guess.
Yeah, totally. And I just want to echo, I think there's something so valuable. I think the industry like doesn't really acknowledge this, but I think it's perfectly fine to leave the industry for better money and like maybe freelance on the side. Frankly, I work at IRE because the journalism job I had before did not pay my bills and I needed to like leave full-time reporting, but I still wanted to do something journalism adjacent and journalism like supportive. And thankfully my job lets me freelance, but like there was absolutely a period where I was like I might not be able to write but I need to pay my bills. So like that's an important calculus to make too. Um, so uh, I think that's also just great. So thank you for that, Drew. Anyone else have anything to add about that?
I was going to say that this isn't good advice, but when I first started working in journalism, I was freelancing also for smaller newsrooms where the pay just wasn't there, and I was the queen of having like 20 gigs at once. Not the best not the best use of my time, right? But I felt like it's what I had to do to not only pay the bills, but also get my name out there and get those bylines up. But one thing that I will say to the person who asked the question is that if you do intend to stay in that market or you really like the work that you're doing and the pay's not there, maybe consider applying for journalism fellowships who can kind of help supplement your income and like help you work on projects that you really care about. So I would look into that.
Yeah, absolutely. Like funding for projects is really, really good. And I've absolutely gone that route to like, I know this outlet isn't gonna pay, like, can there and sometimes if you like propose a partnership between two outlets, like they can like weirdly like kind of commingle. It's like we can only pay you half and then we can pay you half and then it'll be like something decent. So that could be really helpful. Rex, you had something.
Yeah, I was gonna speak to kind of like making life choices where you can fit in the journalism. So, at different points in my career, I have moved away from living in New York City, from Los Angeles, because the cost of living is so high, and I wanted to be able to do certain kind of journalism. So, I mean, if you look at that equation, right, can you lower housing costs? We all have like different kind of calculations that we make to kind of like stay somehow in this industry, whether it's like journalism adjacent, as you just mentioned, Adam. Like it's like we really just need to check in with ourselves about like where our priorities are. And when we had a young child and simply couldn't afford childcare in the US, we moved abroad. I mean, like, now looking back on it, it's like, oh, that's why we did that, because we simply couldn't keep doing journalism in America and have a small child. So it's it's not easy in that respect, but I think if you're stubborn enough and committed enough to make it in journalism, then yeah, I think picking up other journalism storytelling skills other than writing really helps. Unfortunately, writing pays the worst. Even when you hear about these like 10,000 word magazine features, oh, so they pay, everyone says like $1, $2 is a great rate. It's really not, like it take months and months to write and edit and all the, pre-reporting work and all the multiple revisions. It really adds up, and it does not $10,000, $20,000 doesn't go all that far. And so yeah, it's I think, it took me a while, but figuring out that there's no shame at all in doing what you got to do to support this and make it sustainable somehow is an important thing to figure out. And whether it's, yeah, waiting tables or like moving out of the country or moving to a rural community, whatever.
Thank you so much for that. Yeah, totally. And like being and I think, the industry has also taught us so much that like the media capitals are in New York, Los Angeles, like, there's like big cities, but I think the industry also does a really bad job of, acknowledging like rural America's like important sources and just like people to write about. Also, I know I like rubbing my mustache a lot. I made the mistake of trimming my mustache right before this, and now it's super itchy. I really want to actually jump to maybe possibly the last question, depending on time. And I think it's a really important topic that we actually haven't brought up just yet. But how do you balance safety with visibly representing your community, especially as a freelancer with maybe out without the legal and institutional resources of a newsroom? Carly, thank you so much for this question. Carly, reporting in small communities, having to juggle like, do I include my pronouns on my business card? Do I take them off? Is it more impactful to visibly represent your communities that you report on? Or, how do you balance that? I think this is an evolving conversation. It's something that like a lot of journalists have kind of had to start thinking about more seriously as we start seeing like actual physical attacks on the press now. I think what was it yesterday in Arizona? Um Somebody tried to like bomb a journalist's car or something like that. I don't know the exact story, but there were threats against journalists in Arizona, physical threats. There was a man, I believe, arrested last week for putting an incendiary device under a journalist's car, I think in San Antonio. So this is, I think, an escalating conversation. I think it's important to kind of talk about that, especially as freelancers. My perspective, and feel free to disagree with me on this, and I think it's a very personal calculation for everyone. But my calculation is um I am always going to put my safety before a story. I think at the end of the day, I want to be able to continue doing this work. I mean, I obviously want to like be healthy and safe and all of that, but I can't continue to do this work if I'm injured, if not to be grave, but if I'm dead, all of that. And I think at the end of the day, nothing is more important than my safety as a journalist. That is, and I've had to have conversations with editors. I have covered protests where I've told editors, there's like, if it like goes south, I'm dipping. Like, you're not going to catch me. Like, I'm not going to be one of the reporters like on the scene covering protests. Like, I think that's really valuable and important work. That's just not how I felt safe in that moment. So again, I think it's really individualized, but I would love to hear how folks have navigated that, especially now.
A bit of an unsavory answer, but as someone who, um, grew up in like an anxiety-ridden household, um, I think there's only so many measures you can take on, um, and that there is a point, at least for me, where the idea that you can prepare for something like someone doing harm unto you, is a fantasy. Um, and I think it's tied to this generalized fear of the world where anything can happen at any time, and preparing for harm. Um, I don't know. I I struggle with that. It's like there's only so much you can do until you're the one sort of like shutting yourself out from the world and getting in your own way. But of course, like I understand this is a woo-woo answer.
No, I think it's so, there's like the abstract idea of like danger, but then there's also, like the very real physical danger. And I think there's a little bit of both. How do you protect yourself? Like take like physical measures, like when you're going out to cover a protest, like having like a face rag or a face mask or like a water bottle or a helmet versus like what happens if, I think, can extrapolate really, really widely. And you can get, I myself, again, I am just a ball of anxiety on a good day, that like I can get like really, really circular, that like what if it's like what else, and that kind of abstract thinking can almost detract from like the very real steps I can take to keep myself safe. So I think that's actually a really important perspective, Denny. Thank you. So I think we're coming right up on time. Anyone have any last words? I think this has been so good. I've enjoyed everything everyone has said. I'm so grateful to all of y'all, but any last thoughts?
I just wanted to riff off of what Denny said real quick. I don't know that it's a last thought at all. It shouldn't be, but um, the fear is real, and I think that's very much what this regime, this government wants us to feel right now in our different identities and communities. And so I don't have the answer other than I'm trying to be more aware of the generalized fear of the world, of the rhetoric, of what I'm hearing, of what I'm reading, what you just mentioned about like, attempts against like journalists in Texas or Arizona. Like it's just adding to that list I have in my mind. But I totally agree that aside from taking some precautions and like I don't know, we have to learn to kind of keep working within that fear and recognize when we're getting swept away by it, because that's very much the agenda. And, and it's working when we let that happen, when we let it from showing up as who we are or from doing the work that we otherwise love.
Yeah, I would say like, be honest about your own risk profile, like what, what it is what risks you actually face on a daily basis, and also your risk tolerance, like what types of risks you're willing to tolerate on a daily basis. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I grew up in this industry being very scared, and grew up period being very scared, and um, I don't know. I don't. It has it saved me? Probably, but uh, yeah, I don't know. I I don't personally want to cower, and that doesn't mean go out and be reckless, right? But be brave, be brave and have courage and understand that, what you're doing is, part of like a small part, like of like a sort of a mass of activity that is trying to make the world better and safer for people like you.
Amazing. I think that's a really important and great note for us to end on. Lee, I added a little bit of my advice to your question in the chat, but I will just turn it to Catherine to end us out. But again, I can't thank our amazing, amazing panelists enough. This was just really incredible. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Adam. And thank you to everyone for such a really honest, transparent, and helpful conversation. I know at times that are hard like this, it helps me to just know we're not in it alone. So thank you so much to Drew Costley, Denny, Annabel Rocha, Ruxandra Guidi, and Adam Rhodes for being on this panel, to Tre'vell Anderson and everyone at TJA, especially this month, for doing this with us. We're really grateful for your partnership. I actually also put a YouTube in the chat just now that is about the question on being accountable to the community. We did a session on the power edit that Sandia Dirks created to just go through your reporting and your final edit to make sure that you're thinking about accountability and power. So there's so much more we could talk about. I feel like we could be here for another hour, but I want to thank everyone, also to those of you who came, because it really means a lot to us when we speak to our community and folks who show up. So thank you so much for being here. We look forward to more future collaborations and to staying in good touch with everyone.